I've spent the weekend reading about the government's proposals to reform home buying and selling in the UK, so you don't have to. But if you're thinking about buying or selling your home in Northern Ireland, you do need to know what's being planned and how it will affect you, your estate agent, your surveyor, and definitely your solicitor. So after 2 consultations last year about the home moving process generally and upfront material information in particular, the government has released its proposed roadmap for changes to the home buying and selling processes, which will cut delays, reduce and digitalise paperwork, and apparently stop sales collapsing. But have they got it right? Do we think their objectives are correct? Are they going to go about it the right way? No, yes, and absolutely not. We all know that we need to change the whole experience of moving house in Northern Ireland and across the UK. It's often too slow, it can be complicated, there's usually a lot of uncertainty, especially if there's a chain, and you can often feel that you're not in control of your own transaction. I get that, and in fact, I and others have long advocated for reform of how the process works. The government's stated objectives in all this are absolutely laudable, and I agree with them. Faster, more reliable transactions, reduced fall-throughs and risk, high professional standards, better informed consumers, trust and confidence in the system. These are great. No sane consumer or estate agent or solicitor would dispute any of these. The government's new agenda, however, is definitively not the way to achieve these. The key reasons for delays in the conveyancing, the legal process, have not been properly addressed. In fact, some of them have barely even been mentioned. Let's look quickly at the headline proposals. All of this is based on 2 consultations that the government announced last year, one on upfront material information and another major consultation into the entire house moving process in the UK. Number 1, sales pack and upfront information. Sellers and estate agents will have to produce a sales pack at the point of listing. That's the upfront information that we've known about for some time, but that hasn't dealt with some of the major issues with upfront information, namely that it involves legal information that is not understood and is misinterpreted by people who are not legally qualified, leading to perfectly satisfactory properties being rejected by uninformed buyers. I don't see anywhere in the 12-chapter roadmap produced by the government which deals with the issue of legal information being incorrectly interpreted in the absence of a proper qualified conveyancing solicitor. This is all tied in with the property logbooks and what information should be given, and I'll deal with that shortly. Interestingly, looking at the consultation responses, it is the solicitors who were most opposed to the various proposals around upfront information, because technical legal information with no context is liable to lead to very serious consequences for the people who are relying on it. Make no mistake, the government appears to be seeking to replace hundreds of years of expert legal advice with a combination of AI and software solutions. Number 2, binding conditional contracts. Binding conditional contracts, which are a contradiction in terms if ever there was one, will be entered into when the offer is accepted, and it seems that this will happen before the solicitors are even involved. So the house moving process in the UK will be built upon a legal contract entered into with no legal advisors. Can't see anything wrong with that at all. There will obviously be exceptions to the contract being binding. The government gives the examples of death, chain collapses, I'll come back to that, change in financial circumstances, and of course newly discovered property information, which we might also call legal issues. To be clear, if the contract is conditional on any of these exceptions and on legal matters being satisfactory, then it's really not that binding at all. Our experience in Northern Ireland is that most fall-throughs are a result of a legal issue or a mortgage issue, and usually not so much people just simply changing their minds. If that's a thing in the rest of the UK, that's fine, but binding conditional contracts, which is essentially a meaningless term, in Northern Ireland are unlikely to have any particularly beneficial effects and will probably confuse people even more. Older solicitors, by the way, will point out that years ago, not so long ago, people used to get into contract very early on in the legal process and pay a deposit which was maybe 5 or 10% of the purchase price. This was all done via the solicitors, and provided no legal issues were discovered, the purchaser had to complete or else lose their deposit. Such a proposal today, now watered down, isn't actually that innovative at all. And the exceptions are so wide, what you really have is a binding contract that you can get out of, which isn't really a binding contract at all, is it? And let's get back to that proposed exception or get out clause of a chain collapse. Solicitors have been dealing with chains for decades, and whilst we're often left horribly pushed for time because no one commits to the chain until really close to completion, and then there's a mad panic, at least we and our clients are all very clear that everything is up in the air until people start signing binding contracts. It's stressful, but at least you know it's not certain. If someone is in contract and then there's a problem, it's sort of on them to try to sort it out. Otherwise, they're going to be in breach of contract. You'd be amazed how resourceful people can be when they put themselves into these risky situations. And ultimately, someone goes into a hotel for a few nights, or there's a caretaker's agreement put into place and the chain is saved. So what's better, 10 house moves going through or a simple get out clause for a chain collapse with no further effort being required from anyone to try to save it? Oh, and by the way, binding conditional contracts were opposed in the consultation response by most solicitors. Who do you think maybe would be the ones who should have been listening to in the first place? Number 3, a digital property logbook. The digital property logbook is really part of that sales pack and upfront information I've already mentioned, and apparently there was wide support for it in the consultation. A digital property logbook was inevitable given the number of law tech firms trying to wipe the government's eye. And what's more, the companies are actually mentioned in the consultation documents. How's that for being objective with no preconceived ideas whatsoever? Who is going to get the biggest benefit from this? Yep, the software company. Who pays for it? The seller. The devil here will be in the detail. And here's the really weird thing. I've read the government's roadmap several times now, and in Chapter 6, digital property logbooks and packs, doesn't really say what data is supposed to be in the logbooks. Now, we know it will tie in with the upfront information, and Annex B of the roadmap sets out all of the information it thinks should be supplied in the sales pack, which will include the property logbook. But for the moment, we don't really know exactly that is supposed to appear in the logbook itself. The bottom line is that they want to make them format mandatory. So this will enable the law tech and prop tech industries to stick their foot in the door of the process, with the seller paying for it either directly or indirectly via what they pay their estate agent. And so far, with no particular solutions for how some of the personal data can be protected in all this. Actually, on that point, there are a lot of serious questions about the data that they will require and where the data will come from. For a Northern Ireland point of view, that's a major stepping off point between us and the rest of the UK. There's a real push in England, and it's in this roadmap as well, for more and more council data on properties to be unified into a central registry, such as the English Land Registry. In theory then, one search or data request could secure all of the correct, updated and applicable data about all aspects of a property in one place. Indeed, the government is committing £1.4 million this year to commence work with local authorities across the UK to look at this, which, by the way, based on around 382 local properties, is about £3,600 per council, or the cost of a new computer, printer and some Microsoft licenses. Let me tell you that this is incredibly unlikely to happen in Northern Ireland anytime soon, either due to budget or politics or complexity or all of the above. I have to say, I strongly doubt whether the English Ministry of Housing, Communities and Local Government, who have been running this whole initiative, have ever paused for one moment to consider the conveyancing process in Northern Ireland, where we get our property data from, how we get it and what we do with it. £3,500 per council is not going to get them much further along that journey either. Number 4, streamlining transactions and anti-money laundering. There are a few factors in this. Obviously, we've already talked about sales packs, about upfront information and property logbooks, which are designed to streamline the transaction. What I want to focus on here is the government's proposals for how to streamline anti-money laundering. Let me tell you right now that as a solicitor, the government's proposals for streamlining transactions by reorganising how we deal with our anti-money laundering due diligence actually scares me. I am scared that the people in government who are proposing this are so highly ignorant of the solicitor's role in the fight against money laundering and use of terrorist financing that they are once again suggesting that technology at some point in the journey will solve all problems. And when I say the solicitor's role, I mean our legal duties backed up by criminal sanctions. We can go to jail if we don't do our due diligence anti-money laundering properly. And what terrifies me the most is that the government says that rather than changing our anti-money laundering regulations, which sets out the law on all our numerous duties as solicitors, they're going to support sector-led solutions, which means that they're going to leave it to us to deal with this fire in a dumpster truck, and no doubt turn to the law tech software industry, who will charge us more money, which we'll have to pass on to our clients anyway. This roadmap seems to be under the illusion that anti-money laundering checks are just about identity and whether the people that we're acting for are who they say they are and aren't on a sanctions list or aren't a PEP, a politically exposed person. Nowhere, and I mean nowhere, in this roadmap do we see any mention of the far more dangerous and risky element for the solicitor of the anti-money laundering regime. Where is the money coming from? And is it from a legitimate and verifiable source? It's not in the ID bit that causes delays in the process. It's trying to trace your client's finances all the way back to a point where it's clearly legitimate. Outside of the legal profession, which the Treasury signposts as a major facilitator of proceeds of crime and terrorist financing into the property market, no other industry undertakes anything like the amount of due diligence that we are required by law to do. The mortgage lender, financial checks are laughable. The estate agent doesn't even touch the sides of due diligence to get back to a legitimate and verifiable source of funds. The banks, no interest whatsoever, virtually no due diligence, and happy to pay multi-million pound anti-money laundering fines and penalties just as a cost of doing business. Solicitors can literally go to jail for committing a primary money laundering offence. I cannot wait to see how the government sets down a process that we can all rely on across the board. But of course, they won't. And it will still be down to the solicitor. What really worries me, actually it terrifies me and angers me, is this statement from the roadmap. Consultation responses suggest that the biggest gains in conveyancing efficiency will come from the implementation of our wider reforms such as sale packs, digitalisation, digital property logbooks and leasehold and freehold estate sales information. We will therefore prioritise these reforms to streamline conveyancing. Despite the fact that in most of the roadmap the government is happy to break down the responses per industry, I don't see any figures to suggest that this particular proposal is supported by the conveyancers. From a property lawyer point of view, apparently you will be clear on best practice use of AI technologies to automate certain routine aspects of the conveyancing process. I don't even know what this means. Number 5, consumer education and transparency. This should be straightforward for me because the very point of my last decade of work on social media has been an attempt to educate people on the law and what solicitors do, and to increase transparency for my own clients and their agents and their mortgage advisors. I actually designed my own in-house conveyancing web app for that very purpose. But as usual, you can agree with the objective and disagree about how we're going to get there. The main thrust of the government's roadmap here is an advisory charter setting out professional best practice, which will include upfront information, the use of modern digital tools, professional standards, and complaints handling and accountability, which seems less education about the process and more about how to blame people if things don't go the way you want. One big positive for solicitors and agents and surveyors is that the plans to publish information on our services and so-called performance metrics have been abandoned. We all know that reviews online and offline can sometimes be deliberately inaccurate. And of course, most sensible people understand that low cost or high speed will usually sacrifice expertise on the altar of attractive statistics. One thing I should point out, of course, is that even an advisory or light touch charter is going to require regulators and accreditation suppliers and mortgage lenders and maybe even PI insurers to review their own criteria for best practice. There is obviously going to be an overlap which will require significant time and expense to unpick. 87% of professionals raised this issue. Number 6, raising professional standards. This is aimed at estate agents and letting agents. solicitors and surveyors already have numerous mandatory qualifications. Interestingly, 88% of estate agents agreed with the need to improve trust and standards, a welcome recognition that a poor estate agent can completely derail a very straightforward transaction. The journey to raising those standards will start with a non-statutory code of practice, consultation on mandatory qualifications, and eventually legislation to make the code of practice mandatory. I want to make two very quick points. First, I think the vast majority of the other professionals will agree with the majority of agents that mandatory qualifications should raise standards and perhaps encourage less honourable actors to leave the industry. But if you look really carefully at some of the major issues in the sale process, the worst culprit of the lot are potentially the managing agents who are completely unregulated. Many of them don't even know what they're doing. They charge unreasonable fees for the most basic information, and their day-to-day operation of management operations for the development or the apartment building is absolutely abysmal. As far as I can see, and I hope someone corrects me on this, I didn't notice any mention of the regulation of managing agents. In Northern Ireland, this is a huge issue, but the government seems to have ignored it completely. The other point I wanted to make is, of course, to be careful what you wish for. More regulation and more compliance requirements on agents will slow things down, require more work, and of course more expense and continuous training and professional development. So don't be surprised if the estate agents' fees increase, because there's a better service you can actually stand behind. Number 7, challenges in providing material information. It's interesting that nearly a quarter of the roadmap is given over to material information, and to be honest, reflects most of the challenges that we identified in the first consultation exercise last year, which frankly were mostly ignored. Nearly 40% of responses to this part of the consultation identified estate agents' lack of expertise and reliance on other professionals as the most common challenges for material information, which surprised absolutely none of us, because right from the start, conveyancers have pointed out that much of the material information that the government wants to provide up front is actually legal information, which can really only be properly supplied by a qualified conveyancer. When the consultation asked for what types of information should be given up front, the 5 most mentioned items were all legal information: tenure, sewerage, ground rent, service charges, planning permission, water supply. You could argue that the most of the other popular types are also largely legal based: parking, restrictions on use, rights and easements, etc. More interestingly, nearly half of the respondents spotted this and suggested that further details should be provided later on in the process, whereas 40% of respondents still believe that all information, including the legal stuff, should be supplied up front. It's not entirely clear how the government is going to take this forward, but it looks like they're going to provide guidance to estate agents to help them meet their legal responsibilities to provide buyers with relevant information that will explain their existing responsibilities under the Digital Markets Competition and Consumers Act 2024, which frankly no one has managed to do yet, and is trying to avoid the need for further legislation, which I think is a mistake. They talk about the importance of clarity in property listings and the importance of getting data from source. Well, from a Northern Ireland standpoint, all I can say is good luck with that, my estate agency colleagues. Now you'll start to understand the delays in the conveyancing process. I've already mentioned the danger of potential purchasers being put off entirely acceptable properties based on a misunderstanding of legal information that is read without context and without regard to legal advice. Nothing, and I mean nothing, about the government's roadmap allays my fears on this even slightly. In summary, round about a ninth of the roadmap sets out what the government intends to do, how it's going to do it, and when it's going to do it. And for now, it seems that compulsory or mandatory standards are still a way off. There seems to be many references in bringing in legislation when parliamentary time allows, which should be an interesting watch, given the fact that we are on the brink of a new Prime Minister. Well, certainly the last one has resigned. And if the Labour government do what they in opposition complained the Tories didn't do when there was a change of leadership, a potential general election. I haven't mentioned the roadmap on leasehold reform because, frankly, it's less of an issue in Northern Ireland, but we will keep an eye on that in case any of the strategies float across the Irish Sea. The roadmap does clearly say that Northern Ireland is within the remit of this exercise. despite the fact that our land law is not identical and in fact our conveyancing process is markedly different. Genuinely, it seems to me incredible that there is a roadmap to transform how the UK housing market moves house, and there's been scarcely any account taken of the actual legal process. Here's my take on all this. Whilst 82% of respondents to the consultation agreed with the objectives of reforming the process, more than 2/3 commented to propose changes to those objectives and how they were to be carried out. So 66% of interested parties say they're doing it the wrong way. Conveyancers were the group in the consultation who gave the lowest support. Hardly a surprise given that our views have been largely ignored, and it's the legal process which will ultimately take the additional strain of all of these changes. Conveyancers were the least supportive of including both searches and a condition report, and were more likely to oppose this proposal than support it. 28% for, 38% opposed. Sellers will retain overall responsibility for ensuring the sales pack is prepared, with relevant professionals responsible for gathering and verifying relevant information. So this means that the conveyancing solicitor will be instructed, presumably, very early on in the process, which is by far the most welcome part of the whole exercise, and something that we have been shouting about literally for over a decade. So clearly there is quite a bit of expense for the seller up front to get the sales pack together, instruct the solicitor to deal with the legal title considerations, and instructing a surveyor to provide a condition report. Is the seller going to be educated by the government on this, or are professional advisors going to go bankrupt due to no sale, no fee agreements? In my view, the so-called consultation was a charade. It's blindingly obvious to anyone who has stayed awake long enough to read the original consultation document that it was structured in a way which panders completely to the vested interests of the various prop tech and law tech stakeholders who all appear throughout the consultation document. The law tech sector clearly now has more influence than the professional conveyancing profession, whose duty it is to protect the public. Most of our problems are not caused by missing information. They are caused by dealing with people who do not have the training or the experience or the authority to progress a transaction properly. And sometimes that can include an estate agent as well as an unqualified paralegal or case specialist. More upfront information is going to make no difference to that whatsoever. There is no real mention of the costs of getting a sale pack and upfront information together. There instead seems to be an inference that technology and AI will sort all that, pulling accurate, plain English, easy to understand little boxes of information into a nicely formatted document with little or no manual supervision. That's actually beyond satire, frankly. The seller is going to have to pay for a lot of work to be done up front. The estate agent will need to be paid for their role in getting their bit of the material information together. The surveyor will have to be paid to do a condition report, and the solicitor will have to be instructed and paid for the time at the start of the case going through all of the compliance and the regulatory stuff before we even start to apply for the property certificates and searches in Northern Ireland that we need to be able to get to supply official information on tenure, sewerage, water, planning, building control, title restrictions, rights and easements, etc. The outlay alone is now around 350 quid for a couple selling their house, plus our professional fees, plus the agents, plus the surveyors. There is no mention of this anywhere, yet be in no doubt, if material information is to be provided to the level that's being talked about, the seller will have to instruct their solicitor before the property goes on the market. And no one, neither the agent or the solicitor or the surveyor, can afford to offer no sale, no fee agreements. Why is the government blindly relying on technology to the exclusion of the experiences of experts with many years' experience? As one commentator has said, and I can't put it any better than Stephen Larcombe, the spectre of another Post Office Horizon-style IT scandal where blind faith in technology, weak oversight and a naive belief in digital infallibility combined to produce catastrophic injustice. Let me tell you the main reasons for the delay in the legal process of moving house. Crippling anti-money laundering requirements on solicitors, which create delay and uncertainty, even if tackled right at the very outset of the case. abysmal managing agents, completely unregulated, who overcharge for standard information and don't run the development or the apartment buildings correctly. More and more compliance from our regulators, slowing down our decision making and actually increasing our admin burden. Too many unqualified non-solicitors doing work which only solicitors have the experience and professional indemnity cover to actually do, causing issues that should never exist. More and more arbitrary requirements from mortgage lenders and their panel managers, which causes uncertainty and second-guessing ourselves. The small cohort of firms that undercut in fees take on too much work and can't cope. Unreasonable expectations given by some estate agents and some solicitors. This roadmap has good objectives as its foundation, but nearly everything else about it, certainly from a Northern Ireland point of view, is utterly flawed. Be in no doubt the consumer will not be the winner here. The only winner will be the law tech businesses who have completely pulled the wool over the government's eyes. They promise digital transformation, but they will utterly disclaim any responsibility for the legal risks that they are going to create. The conveyancing solicitor will once again have to absorb the fundamental changes in processes and software and training and risk, and that we have to do every single time one of our so-called stakeholders comes up with a new novel idea. It's happened with mortgage lenders, with UK finance, with stamp duty, with overseas entities, with anti-money laundering, and so it will be with this government roadmap as well. Ultimately, as solicitors, we are there to protect the public. We represent them, we give them legal advice, and we make sure that their legal rights are protected when they come into contact with other members of the public. The government plan for reforming house moving in the UK will make that worse, not better. At best, the consumer will pay more, and at worst, they will not have the legal protection that they thought they had. I believe that the government didn't ask the legal profession about how to fix the process because they didn't want to hear the answer they knew that we would end up giving. So instead, they listen to the law tech sector who have promised the earth and will take no responsibility when they deliver house moving hell. I have to mention an article in the Conveyancing Solicitors Daily Bible, Today's Conveyancer, which reported on various stakeholder responses to the roadmap. I'm surprised that the CEO of the Council of Licensed Conveyancers strongly supports the reforms, as does the CEO of Homeowners Alliance and the president of Silex, Nationwide Building Society, the chair of the Residential Logbook Association, much less of a shock there, and 3 law tech companies that I am not even going to name. And yet not a single conveyancing solicitor anywhere that I've read strongly supports or even welcomes this roadmap. Yeah. We're at the very start of the journey. I have a suspicion that some of this will fall away by the wayside, and I think certainly from a Northern Ireland point of view, some of the strategies are just not workable unless massive investment is made in the systems of our court offices, of our own Northern Ireland Land Registry, our Regional Property Certificate Unit and our Council Property Certificate Units. Nothing to date has demonstrated either the money or the political willpower to make this happen. Mandatory qualifications for agents is workable and would be welcome, but unless managing agents are also included in this, the gains I think will be modest. Sales packs with upfront information and property logbooks will happen, I think, but the seller will be paying over £1,000 to get all of the legal information, the condition report, and for the expertise to spot issues that need to be fixed. As I've already said, I don't think that this is a win for the consumer or the solicitor or the estate agent. It's only a win for the law tech companies who have been sitting on the government's shoulder throughout this entire charade with one direction of travel. And yet in Northern Ireland especially, will people want AI automated processes, or will they want to speak to their solicitor face to face, use the benefit of our experience and expertise, and sleep well in their new homes knowing that their legal rights have been protected? Thank you so much for watching. If you have any comments, questions, or if you disagree with anything I've said, please let me know in the comments or message us on one of our socials.